Um, so today we're going to talk a little bit about best practices for improving startup ecosystems. So let me just share my screen with you, and then we can get going. I do want to say that the goal is to have this as a little bit of an interactive session. So feel free to to ask questions. That's one of the reasons why we do those gatherings, is to get a little bit of questions and figure out if there is anything that is interesting for you. So feel free to make it as interactive as possible. So that's the idea. So let me, before I start, so first of all, my name is Eli David. I'm the CEO of StartupBlink, a global startup ecosystem app and a research center. I'm going to give you a quick brief about what is StartupBlink, and then basically move to the lecture itself, or to the talk. So first of all, StartupBlink is a global startup ecosystem map. You can see it over here. It has many startups, a very nice sample from all over the world. The data is crowdsourced. It's by global data partners like Crunchbase, Statista, SEMrush, and many others. And there are about 100 governments that are also updating data into StartupBlink to create a very comprehensive visualization of the global startup ecosystem. So that's basically the idea. The platform is open; it's free for everyone to use. So we definitely encourage you to do so. Generally, you can filter by everything, and you can go to any dashboard of any city in the world and see what's the exact situation. For example, this is the dashboard of London, but we have thousands of those dashboards. So just in case if you're traveling somewhere or want to understand the condition of the ecosystem you're going to or interested in, the dashboard are here to help you. In addition to that, StartupBlink also has rankings of, we rank the ecosystems of 1,000 cities and 100 countries. So we're very well known for this ingredient of the ability to run a very comprehensive algorithm and rank all those cities. Why do we do that? For you. We think that the location that you choose for your startup is going to be critical for its chances of success. We also think that those that work on economic development have to know how their ecosystem is doing. So over here, you have very nice tables. Again, 1,000 cities, 100 countries. You can switch between them. You can filter by region, by industry, population, and so on, and browse this entire rankings. For those of you that want to learn more about the rankings and how they're done, you have a 400 pages report that you can download here just below the map, and that would take you basically to this massive report that analyzes the status of the startup ecosystems across many regions, across all countries, and so on. So a very comprehensive report. Good. So that's basically it about StartupBlink, just as a quick intro. Let me start the actual presentation, and the goal for today is basically also to answer your questions. You can either put them in the chat or in the Q&A button. Would love to hear from you and kind of speak about things that you are most interested in. So we can start maybe with a little bit of stages of the ecosystem, which is basically for all the entrepreneurs out there. It's very important to know in which stage your ecosystem is, mainly because of knowing if you're in the right place or not. So if I go back to the point of knowing if you're in the right place or not, a good startup ecosystem can connect you to great investors, to good team members, to amazing suppliers, to like-minded co-founders, and so on. And we simply always encourage people to go, if they can, to improve their position and to go to a better ecosystem. It might seem like it's going to cost you money and it's going to create a lot of financial distress, a little bit in comfort, but I'm telling you that the amount of opportunities that are at your disposal when you go to a very high quality startup ecosystem, you will simply keep on receive gifts, basically, or unexpected gifts in a way, that I don't think we are in a position to give up on if we want to build a startup. And that also connected to, even if you don't want investors and you're more interested in bootstrapping a startup, being in the right place will simply give you a lot more opportunities to meet like-minded people, new clients, and so on. So there are many advantages, and what we always say is that if your startup ecosystem is underperforming, you have two options. One of them is to leave the ecosystem to a better one, and the other is to lead the ecosystem and to help it grow. But what we do not advise is to stay very passive in an underperforming ecosystem. That's a little bit of giving up on yourself and on your startup as well. So that's kind of like the notion behind it. There are many locations that have underperforming ecosystems, many locations where the public sector um, does not really understand what are startups. They don't understand the importance and the ability of startups to change their economies. And if you're stuck in a place like that, you know, maybe consider going somewhere else. So that's kind of like the idea behind it. We won't go over the stages, but basically just to say there is a seed startup ecosystem. Something is starting, not enough critical mass. Developing startup ecosystem, more things are happening, more startups, maybe a small success story here and there. There is a regional hub in the style of Singapore, of Dubai, places that are attracting entrepreneurs from all over the region to arrive to them, a very good status. And are the global hubs, the ones that are actually basically attracting people from all over the world to arrive to them. Of course, the most notable one would be San Francisco, but also New York is there, London, LA, Boston, and so on. So that those are the really the global hubs out there. And let's talk a little bit about the stakeholders in each ecosystem, starting with probably the most stakeholder that is the most important, which is the entrepreneur. Uh, the entrepreneurs are everything in the startup ecosystem. And honestly, when you actually look at the startup ecosystem to understand if it's successful or not, the quality of the entrepreneurs is going to determine everything. It's not going to be the government, it's not going to be the co-working spaces, it's not going to be the corporates, it's the entrepreneurs. They are the most important part. And so yeah, that's basically the idea. And there are many incentives of why people would want to become entrepreneurs. I honestly think that becoming an entrepreneur is a little bit suicidal. Chances are against you. There are 90% chances of failure. And if you do fail, nobody would help you to recover from this loss of time and loss of money. And if you win, everyone shares your success in a way. So in a way, I look at entrepreneurs as the new soldiers of the modern era. Those are the people that are basically going out there, doing something against all odds, and basically building an economy of their nation in a way. So, yeah, so I think it's a very interesting concept, the concept of entrepreneurs and what makes basically people become entrepreneurs. This is the secret sauce of a startup ecosystem. If a country has a mindset and a social culture of becoming an entrepreneur, the country is benefiting. It basically has more soldiers volunteering to go to the economic war of your city or your country. So it's always advisable. The countries that suffer the most are the countries that do not persuade enough people to take this path, risk-averse cultures. And those are the countries that will not benefit from high quality startup ecosystems. So that's the idea. And basically the idea for founders and a little bit about the culture of high quality entrepreneurs. I'm coming from a country, Israel, that considers to have very good entrepreneurs. A lot of it is the fake it until you make it. We have the little bit this mentality in Israel. It's a mentality also, of course, in the USA. The idea over here is to be in a situation that you can really believe that you're going to build the next thing, even when you have nothing. Being a little bit delusional in a way. In some locations, like the Nordics or Asia, where people are much more modest, which is a skill that our parents and our environment is teaching us to be, they have difficulties with their startups because you can't give big promises on things that don't exist if you are a modest person and a very conservative person. So the idea of fake it until you make it has a lot of magic in it. You need it as an entrepreneur because in the beginning you have nothing, and your goal is to basically conquer a niche, conquer a segment of the economy. So it's a little bit delusional, but still something that is needed and has to do a little bit with the psychology of the entrepreneurs. Places that have a mentality of give first are usually places that are winning. Apparently, San Francisco is the one that is most known for this thing about people geared toward helping other entrepreneurs. The stakeholders are helping each other. This is something that is very interesting. I'm currently in Bulgaria, by the way, and I see a little bit of this mentality here as well. When you have an ecosystem that helps each other, it's absolutely splendid, and it just works. It just works so much better. You have a few ecosystems with isolated success stories that are not really connected to the ecosystem, and then those success stories are disappearing. In many cases, they would even be a little bit considered as manipulators or people that have done something that is not good. So the idea is that the ability of a startup ecosystem to support each other, to celebrate the wins of each other, is something that is very important. Mainly happening in San Francisco, and now other ecosystems are learning from this. Ecosystems that are more closed will probably not be successful because they're not really fun to be in anyway. You don't want to be a success story in an ecosystem that doesn't celebrate your success. That's something to think about. So that's a little bit about the entrepreneurs. Once again, if you have any questions, chat or Q&A, if you pick your place. And universities. Universities are not important. They're no longer that important, to be honest. The only thing that where universities are becoming important is if they create very high quality research that usually the researchers that create this knowledge are not entrepreneurs themselves because they're professors in the university and so on. And then they become important if the universities are managing to get those technologies and move them to the end of the market of the entrepreneurs outside. In Israel, for example, the biggest exit ever, Mobileye, sold to Intel for $15 billion, is built in a university and then outsourced to a startup founder that really liked the idea and built it basically. So when universities are not that entrepreneurial and cannot really impact our startup ecosystems, but they do come with very high quality research. And when it happens, and if they know how to make the connection with the private sector, some very high quality things can happen, especially in deep tech. So that's where the universities are becoming very important for startups. The government is a double-edged sword on the level of startup ecosystem. First of all, as written over here, the worse your startup ecosystem, the more you would like the government to be involved, because there is no ability for the private sector to generate return on investment. So just like, for example, a baby. A baby cannot grow on its own. Someone has to give it food and shelter and so on. And then when the baby is grown up, the baby can go and walk on his own and work and create an economic life and so on and so on. So startup ecosystems and cities that are in a stage of babies that they can't walk yet and they're still trying to build those skills, that's where the government has to support the most. So that's very important. And we in StartupBlink usually think that government should not be that involved in picking favorites, in actually meddling with the startup ecosystem. A lot of governments really enjoy it. They have grants and they choose which startups are the best and they help invest in them and so on and so on. In the best ecosystem, this doesn't happen. The private sector is doing that. You definitely don't want the government to pick favorites and kind of say, I support you as a startup and you as a startup, I don't. They don't have skin in the game. They usually do not have the expertise of investment, and it's not their money as well. So basically what we always recommend to government, focus on making your ecosystem better as an ecosystem, legislation, analysis, promotion, marketing, building the narrative of your ecosystem. not so much on the picking the favorites and helping startups specifically. This can bring a lot of problems. Investors. Everyone is asking when you speak with startup ecosystems and you speak with the cities and countries and you're asking them what is the biggest problem, they would generally always tell you that there are not enough capital, not enough investors. But this is not really the problem. The problem is why are there not enough capital and why are there not enough investors? The reason is usually that when you ask the why are there not enough investors? Investors are smart. They would go where there is return on investment. So the reason of why you cannot convince investor to arrive here to your ecosystem is that you did not have enough success stories. If you would have success stories, they would arrive. They would run. They would not even arrive slowly. They would run. So investors follow success. And when we say that there are not enough investors and so on, it simply means that our startup ecosystem is not generating enough success stories to attract investors. That's basically the situation. So, of course, we want to make sure that we make investors' life easier on tax benefits, on legislation and so on to make sure that they have an easy time. But generally, you can't really force them to arrive to your city. They would arrive when they start noticing success. Just like other humans, the biggest power that guides them is one of them is fear of missing out. They would see those success stories and they would arrive. Just like in Israel, many of them arrived to Israel after a few success stories. Everyone started noting, okay, there is something going on there. We have to be there. So that's the idea about the investors. You can't really convince them. They follow success. Accelerators, there is a lot of reason to join accelerators and so on. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Generally, the lower quality the ecosystem, the more you want accelerators because they also function as those mini MBAs of teaching people how to do entrepreneurship, of creating those connections and so on. But they're very varied in quality. Some of them are great, some of them are not really worth it and will only run for one batch. So that's the idea, but definitely we want them. Co-working spaces are important. One of the biggest problems of entrepreneurship is the psychological loneliness, let's say, of being an entrepreneur. And if you are stuck at home all the time and so on, you're probably gonna feel a little bit down. The ability to go out there and to have a space where you can meet like-minded people that do the same like you, that did not choose the 9 to 5, is absolutely critical, and that's why we like co-working spaces, so much. It's a great place to do events and to do networking and to meet your co-founders and so on. So they're very important for the growth of the startup ecosystem. We have those community leaders and ecosystem developers from the private sector. An ecosystem is very, very lucky if it has those people. In many ecosystems, they don't exist because there isn't that much money in this. But the idea is that those are people that are organizing meetups and events and so on and so on. And of course, they're a blessing for the ecosystem. If we have private sector developers that care about the ecosystem, that's absolutely great. In many, many cases, the governments that have the budgets are not compensating them and not helping them enough, or even not caring about them at all. And that's a little bit of a pity. Open innovation, corporates have different mentality, but they do have a lot of resources. So if you have a startup ecosystem where the corporates are actually understanding that the startups are the future of innovation and can be a solution for their R&D problems, then you have very nice things that are happening. Many corporates are very active, like Google and Microsoft and Intel, in investing in startups and building startups, in doing joint ventures with startups. So we see them as a very interesting force in startup ecosystem. There are also the service providers, important people. That the higher quality the service providers are, the better the ecosystem is. You see, a startup ecosystem is a combination of many, many, many stakeholders. Of course, the key or the heart are the entrepreneurs, but if you don't have the other pieces of the puzzle glued, then it's hard to build something. And that's why we always say, look, if you're in a city or a country that does not really have all those ingredients, you're shooting yourself a little bit in the leg, because you can't create those ingredients on your own. Imagine being in a place that all those ingredients are in place and are working great. So it makes sense to pick your location wisely. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Is it possible for an area with relatively small number of population, 300,000 startups, for example, to become an important startup hub or ecosystem? A great question. So first of all, a city that has a lot of people has an unfair advantage, without a doubt. Why? Mathematics. Let's say you have a city of 10 million people. 10% of them are intelligent, and the other 90% have no idea. Of course, it doesn't really exist. So everyone is intelligent in the same way. But just giving you the example of numbers, then you have 1 million people that are into startups, intelligent into startups and so on. Then you have a small city of 300,000. Let's say 50% are intelligent and are super into startups. But then again, you have only 150,000. The other city has 1 million. So these million are going to connect with each other and so on and find each other in any case. So the idea is that, yes, a city that is bigger has an unfair advantage. Are there cities that are small and are successful? Absolutely, yes. Santa Barbara, Boulder, Kingston in Canada. You have quite a few cities, Tel Aviv, that is not that big and still extremely successful. So you have quite a few cities that, although they're relatively small, they manage to pull it off. But definitely the bigger cities have an unfair advantage. By the way, the bigger countries as well also have an unfair advantage. Look at places like India, for example. You don't need to be very innovative. You have a market of more than 1 billion people. This market it needs local solutions. So the idea is that just by having a country like India, Nigeria, Indonesia, and so on, your market is so big that you can create unicorns just by copying other models from other countries. So that's the benefit of being in a very big market. Brazil is one of them as well. Big market, big economy that the smaller ones do not have. The smaller ones are actually very also enjoying. The countries that are less than, let's say, 15 million people, they never build startup solutions for locally. So countries like Israel, Estonia, and so on, they would think about going global from day one. And that's very beneficial because they're not confused. They know that they have to go global, so they can create a lot of impact even though they're extremely small. The countries that we call it the medium country curse. The medium country curse basically means that if you're in a country in a medium size, let's say 40 million people, 30 million people, that's where it becomes confusing. Because many of the entrepreneurs are going to say, hey, let's start building locally. And then they're stuck and they don't go globally. So actually those countries that are in the middle of not having more than, let's say, 100 million people, between 20 to 100, that's where we see a lot of friction, a lot of entrepreneurs that could have built something that are global, but because it's somehow okay to generate money locally, they would stay there. So that's the idea. So it goes many ways. The size of the population of the country and the city, and the impact it has on the ecosystem. So it's pretty interesting topic. Okay, a few guidelines, because I really don't want to take a lot of your time. This is supposed to be about 35 minutes with questions. So this is maybe the main guidelines that we have for ecosystem development. Our role as ecosystem developers, in a way, is not to build the ecosystem. Once again, the ecosystem is the entrepreneurs in the private sector. Like we're not in a position to build an ecosystem. Our goal is to basically allow the entrepreneurs to fulfill their potential. Many countries have a lot of anomalies. They have a lot of barriers. They have a lot of barriers that make it extremely difficult for startup founders to operate. Massive social security payments, bureaucracy, red tape, very difficult to hire people, to fire people, and so on, to give options to people, and so on. So if you want to do something as a government, instead of meddling with your startups and kind of picking favorites, doing grants, work on the macro level, on basically allowing people to fulfill their full potential in a way. And we sometimes say that if a government can only pick to do one thing, it should just make sure that it does no damage. Because in many cases, our rules and legislations and so on do a lot of damage for the startup ecosystem and for the entrepreneurs themselves. So that would be maybe the main thing that you want to focus on. But you also want to be active as a government, especially in the beginning phase in an ecosystem. The ecosystem needs you. There is no ROI for investors You do need to be active, creative, supportive. The last bullet basically says that when it's time to pass the baton to the private sector, you want to get out of the way. Too many countries fell in love with startup ecosystem development, and now they feel like if they stop supporting and so on, everything is going to collapse. That creates a problem because then they just push out the stakeholders from the private sector in a way. That's very common in Europe, by the way, and that's one of the reasons why Europe has never really succeeded to create high quality ecosystems that make an impact in those trillion dollar startups. It has all the potential, all the talent to do so. It never managed to do that, and much of it is because of excessive government support. So that's the idea. I'm going to look at on a few slides that I think are the most interesting. Yeah. So the idea is first of all to what should we do as ecosystem developers? There are a few things we can do in order to understand our ecosystem. First of all, to start talking with our startup entrepreneurs. Many governments are not even talking with people to understand what bothers people. When you start speaking with people, the same stories are going to repeat. It's very hard to open a company. The taxes are too high, or the structure of building a company is too difficult, and so on. So speaking with people is very important. We also believe that actually dragging people from other ecosystems to arrive to your ecosystem is extremely important. We are all in a little bit of a sum-zero game. It's a little bit sad, but all cities are in a sum-zero game competing for the same talent. Many cities still think that they can cooperate and maybe do startup initiatives with other cities and so on. We don't see it this way. Basically, we all fight for the same talent, and all of the cities have responsibility to maintain their economic future by bringing the best people to the ecosystem. So the idea over here is to be as attractive as possible and to build a narrative of success. As governments, we have to spend a lot on promotion, on marketing our ecosystem. A startup ecosystem, a city, is basically a product, and you want to extensively market it in a way. So that's kind of like the idea over here. Many governments are not doing that, and that's a bit of a pity because nobody's going to do the marketing for a city or a country other than the governments themselves. We talked a little bit about when we give too much help to our entrepreneurs, we're creating a problem. We're creating a problem because we're pushing out the investors, the private sector investors. For example, Poland is a good example. Poland basically created a situation that they a little bit poisoned their ecosystem by giving too much support to the ecosystem. So you're in a situation that now the private sector investors are not in the game because they can't compete with free money from the government. The valuations are inflated because of free money from the government. And in addition to that, the entrepreneurs, instead of being focused on getting money from investors that have skin in the game and developing their product, they're now going to be focused on applying for grants and investment by the governments. So they're filling forms instead of building products. So sometimes when we give too much support, that's what we get. And that's the idea. We talked about a few things here that make sense. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We have a few case studies. Maybe I can just say about the things that I was most impressed with each one of those countries. Estonia, one of the best ecosystem marketers out there. They're just masters in creating a narrative. The ecosystem is not as good as we think it is, but they pumped it so much and created the brand of Digital Estonia and so on that more and more people started arriving. So maybe they were disappointed in the beginning, but you have more and more high quality people arriving, and now reality is catching up to the narrative. So Estonia has done a very good job as a small country on not giving up and creating a brand, a startup brand. One more thing I like about Estonia is Skype. Skype is basically almost a Swedish startup. It was created by Swedish owners, but developed in Estonia. And the beauty over here is that some of the Estonian founders that were extremely talented, after Skype got sold and did an exit, they used the money to reinvest in the ecosystem. So you have two types of an ecosystem. One, when someone is making an exit, they run away like crazy to Luxembourg or Switzerland or the United States because everyone thinks that they're a scammer and everyone is jealous of them. And you have other types of ecosystems where the founders that made an exit become investors, and then they create some kind of a flywheel of the ecosystem. Very, very powerful. So when you're lucky enough to have your entrepreneurs making a big exit, staying in the ecosystem and keep on investing in the ecosystem itself, magical things are happening. The same happened, by the way, in Israel. Israel has a lot more better results than Estonia. Much of the Israeli economy currently is fueled and engined by startups. Israel is a great example of if you get it right, what happens? You become from a developing country to an extremely developed country to a very strong country and a country that just has massive amount of taxes and so on. It doesn't even need oil. It just gets money from exits and the massive salaries that startups are paying. So that's a beautiful example. Singapore, another great example of a country that has made such good policies and cares so much about startup ecosystem development that they now attract talent from all over the region. And that's a very, very powerful example of if you focus on something, good things are happening just by caring a lot about it. So that's kind of like a little bit the idea over here. So we had a small gathering today. I hope it was beneficial for those that attended. And yeah, just we're going to continue doing those. So we're going to be very happy if you join the next one. The idea is just to brainstorm a few ideas about what did we learn working with those 100 governments. What did we learn about what works, what doesn't work? So I hope it was useful. That's my email, eli@startuplink.com. Feel free to send an email if you have any questions. And that's basically it for today. Thank you very much. Enjoy. Bye bye.